Okay, I'm going to tell you a bit about the curatorial criteria for this year's Open House Festival. I'm going to say a bit about what we mean by curatorial criteria. I'm going to explain why we have them. I'll talk about how, as a festival team, we apply the criteria, and then we'll briefly look at the four sort of sections of the criteria. So, what do we mean by curatorial criteria? Well, it's a web page. So it's a short document that's up on the Open City website for everyone to access and look at. And it explains what we're looking for. So what we as a festival team are looking to include in the festival program. And then it also includes a scoring system, which is what we use as we're going through and assessing applications. So why do we have curatorial criteria? And why do we score it in that way? Well, for consistency, we're a team of 4. All of us at some point will assess some applications. So we want to be consistent. We want to make sure that we're making consistent decisions across the group. We want to be transparent. Where we do refuse an application, we want to be clear about why we've done it. If someone comes back to us and asks, we want to be able to explain in a way that's sort of reasonable and that's clear. And we also do it so that we can structure any feedback we have. So we never just sort of refuse an application outright. We'll always give some feedback first. So we might say, it's great that you want to include your building in this year's festival program, but as you are usually open to the public, we'd ask you to put on some additional activities to be included in the festival program. And we can refer to the relevant area of the curatorial criteria as we give that feedback. It's worth saying that in practice, we accept the vast majority of applications we receive. We find that most people have a look at the curatorial criteria, that they sort of abide by it, that they make applications that are in the sort of spirit of the festival. So in practice, it's a relatively small number of places where we have to sort of enter into feedback and then eventually say no to. In many cases, we'll go back with a bit of feedback and someone will say, oh yes, we can do a bit of additional activity, or we can adjust what we're doing to sort of fit with the curatorial criteria. But yeah, just to say, we end up accepting most places. The other reason we have the curatorial criteria is that we want to ensure that all open days and events that form part of the festival program champion our mission. And so that mission is, here it is, the statement of it. The festival team is looking for open days and events that champion the festival's mission of giving people access to spaces they wouldn't otherwise be able to get into, creating opportunities for people to learn from and about buildings, infrastructure, landscapes, and from each other, celebrating great architecture and the people who live and work in it and care for it. Okay, so how do we apply the criteria? So we do it when we're looking at application forms, not expressions of interest. So as you might have seen, if you've never taken part in the festival before, we ask you to complete a short expression of interest form and then to follow it up with a full application form. For people who've taken part before, whether it's sort of 1 year or many years, we just ask them to do the application form. So that's the point at which we apply the curatorial criteria, the sort of longer application form. Like I've been saying, we sort of look for reasons to include, not to exclude. So we try to be really positive in how we apply the criteria. Anyone who scores, anyone who scores 3 or more is approved, and we'll always give feedback if someone's not scoring at least 3. So we never just say no. We always say this is where something's not just sort of falling a bit short of the curatorial criteria, and let's have a chat and see what we could do about that. We break down the criteria into 4 sections, which I'll sort of run through. They're opening up, learning, animation, and accessibility. So opening up. So one of the things we score highly is giving access to the usually inaccessible. That's one of the key ways in which buildings can fulfill the festival's mission. So if a building, this is often, true of a private house, it's not accessible to people otherwise throughout the year. So opening up if you open your home for the festival, you're giving people access to the usually inaccessible. That might be, that can also be true for access to part of a building. So say you're opening up a place of work or other building, a public building. Maybe there's areas of the building that are usually open to the public, but during the festival you're going to open other spaces that are not usually accessible to the public. So that's another example of giving access to the usually inaccessible. And that will score you 2. Also, if you're giving access for free to a space where there's usually a charge, that also scores a 2, because you'll be giving an opportunity of access to people to whom a charge might be a barrier. Okay, learning. So we talk about this as having something interesting to share. This is about introducing, interpreting, explaining the space to visitors. It's not about being an expert in architecture or in the history of the building, although if you are any of those things, it's wonderful to share that expertise, and we really welcome that. But in lots of cases, visitors are just really keen to know sort of what you think of the building. So if it's somewhere you live, how do you live in it? How do you find the experience of living it? If you work there, what's it like to work there? What are the advantages? What are the challenges? What do you like about it? What's tricky? What do you usually do in the space? What kind of activities does the space make possible? Those sort of questions. This is especially important if the space you're opening is usually open for free. That's when we'll sort of ask you to do some sort of additional activity. So putting on a tour or finding a way to interpret or explain or introduce the space is a really key sort of learning activity that you can do. Animation. So by this we mean something happening in the space. A performance, an exhibition, something sort of, an activity, a demonstration, something like that, something that doesn't necessarily need to relate to the space thematically, though it might do. It might be about the community or the organisation that currently uses the space, or a community or organisation that has used it in the past. So this picture there, this is from a jazz performance in a 1950s library. So there the contributors were sort of drawing a parallel between the sort of experimentation of post-war modernism and jazz, and kind of looking at kind of what happened when you kind of combined these two sort of experimental forms. Although it does, like I say, the two things don't have to speak to each other quite as neatly as that. But this is just one example of where they did. And again, as with learning, this is especially important if the space you're opening is usually open for free. And then accessibility. So the key thing here is about removing barriers, removing as many barriers to access as you can. We appreciate that not all buildings are fully accessible. In fact, most buildings are not fully accessible, and that particularly if you have a historic building where you're quite limited in what you can do, or if it's your own home, or you're working somewhere with a limited budget, or whatever it is, it's not possible to remove all barriers to access. But we do encourage you to think about the barriers that you can remove, the adaptations that you can make. The criteria lists some examples, but there are sort of other possibilities too. So the point of this section really is just to get you kind of thinking about what the barriers to access might be and what you might be able to do about them. So a key sort of message here is, if you're opening a space for free that isn't usually open for free, that's enough. So, for example, how this might work in relation to the criteria is you get 2 points for opening the space, and you get 1 point for a good about section. So that's making sure there's lots of interesting information on your listing for visitors, and that would score you the 3. So hopefully that kind of feels quite straightforward and achievable. If your space is usually open for free, for example, as some places of worship are, then we'd ask you to do a little bit extra for the festival. So in this instance, someone is giving a tour of a mosque. That would give you 2 points in the curatorial criteria. You might want to also think about ways in which you could improve access to the space and access to that tour. So, for example, including a large print guide of the building, which would be 1 point, and that gets you to 3. If you're running a walking tour, you don't also need access to buildings. So a key kind of element of the festival's mission is accessing spaces that aren't usually open. But another key sort of plank of that mission is giving visitors opportunities to learn about and experience familiar or otherwise accessible spaces in a new way. And that's something that walking tours in the public realm absolutely do. So you don't also need to access buildings if you're running a walking tour. So you get 2 points for the walking tour because you're kind of giving someone an opportunity to explore an area of the city in a new way. And you'd get a point for a good sort of about section. So being really clear about your plans for the tour, the kind of content, maybe the route, amenities that are available kind of as part of the route, things like toilets, seating, that sort of stuff. And that would score you 3 against curatorial criteria. Okay, and here are just some useful links. So I've got a link to the curatorial criteria there on the website. There's a link to the Open House Festival 2025 page. It's just sort of general information page for contributors, for visitors, for volunteers, and that's a bit of a landing page for everything else. So if you're sort of not sure where to find a bit of information, go to that 2025 festival page, and you should be able to find links and other things there. Then third, there's a guide to completing the application process. This is a step-by-step guide to how you fill in the application forms, what that process looks like, and what information you need to include. And then at the bottom, there's some guidance on when to open. So if you're just opening a building on one weekend of the festival, we depending on which borough you're based in, we offer some guidance on which weekend to open. You don't have to follow that guidance, but we find, for example, if everyone in the borough of Camden opens on the same weekend, that's going to be a much better experience for visitors because they can kind of just hop from building, event to event, and you're likely to get far more visitors on the day. Okay, that's it.